Great to have you.
Hello, welcome.
Hello. So we are going to be talking about classroom assessment techniques, and I'm really going to be looking at formative assessment techniques, not necessarily summative, but I'm happy to talk about summative assessment as well. The first thing that we want to do is make sure everybody can get into the WooClap activity that we're going to use throughout the session to weigh in, and I'm going to participate too, so we have some results to look at. So I like to use my QR code scanner on my phone. Feel free to do the same if that works for you.
So when you do it on your phone, do you just do the WooClap on your phone, or should I do it on my laptop?
I just capture the QR code because then I can just use my phone as like essentially a place to put in answers and I don't have to mess with tabs. But a lot of people just open up a new tab too, and you're welcome to do that. And you can just toggle back and forth. Whatever you like to do.
Let's go to. All right, I am in.
Awesome. Okay, so we're actually going to start with an activity not in WooClap. I want to know what comes up for you when you think about assessment. So I'm actually going to put in the chat a little link to a Jamboard, and we're gonna work out of that for just a hot second. Do you use Jamboards?
I don't have many synchronous online classes.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
So I like Jamboards even when I'm not online, like even in a classroom environment. You can throw the link out to your students and they can grab it. Again, they can grab it on their phone or whatever. And then you've got an opportunity to get their thoughts without them necessarily having to talk. Some students just don't really want to speak up in class. So it looks like you're in. And oh, there we go. She's making the stickies. I'm going to do some too. And I'm going to share our Jamboard so that our viewers at home can see what we're putting together here. All right, so you've got a few on here. I've got a few on here. You want to talk about a couple that you added?
Sure. So most of the time we think of assessment, they go like a test.
Yeah.
Or, tried and true. There's some questions, then you write or submit online something to show you know something.
Absolutely. So that test kind of demonstrates where you are at the end of what you've supposed to have learned, right? And then the teacher goes, oh, they didn't learn anything, or oh, they got it, right? That summative assessment piece, I think we're really familiar with that. Do you do a lot of those in your engineering? Like it's pretty test driven. You guys have a number of tests throughout the semester?
At least two to three tests.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm imagining you're also using are there quizzes, or do you guys do assignments or projects or?
Assignments, projects, quizzes.
Okay. All of those. And those are assessments too, right? And we may consider those formative assessments, like they're happening kind of midway in a learning experience, or they could be happening towards the end of a unit in substitution for a test. I'm curious about solo effort, but I'll defer to you. What's another one you want to talk about?
Stressful. Most of the time students get pretty stressed when there's, and myself, if I've got a test, I know that I've got to study, I've got to, be prepared. I know how to do everything. So the stress.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's great when we help students prepare by letting them know it's going to happen. I don't think it's super kind to do it, like, especially like a high stakes. Nobody wants to walk into a high stakes assessment not knowing it's going to happen. But then we do have that stress that results from knowing, right? And like, how do I prepare? And am I preparing the right way? And so, yeah, that can definitely be stressful. I use the word pressure kind of in a similar, like I was thinking, we put that pressure on ourselves to show up and do well for that. I see that you use the word reflection, and that seems like not an opposite of stressful, but what's up with that word for you?
I think that's kind of like they can figure out where they're at.
Yeah.
So, I like just today, second class, I did a reading quiz.
Okay.
So to kind of give them an idea of, what the format's gonna look like for online testing and quizzes, how the questions will look. And we kind of discussed afterwards, like, how did your note taking reflect, because they can use notes for their quiz for this class.
Yeah.
How did your notes compare to what the information was presented? There was some feedback on that. I should probably take more details here, or, I really have it covered here. So,
Yeah. I love using assessments like that to get them to reflect on their own practice and how they prepare and how ready they are and like what they might want to do differently next time. And how they can plan for a different result if they didn't like what happened this time. I mean, I think that's ultimately that's what assessment can really help us all do, right? And we should be doing that all the time. That's kind of a nice segue. I'm gonna go back to sharing our WooClap screen here. For me, these are some key things that I want to make sure that we kind of put out there on the front end of what I want us to be thinking about with assessment. Assessment ultimately should be learning. As instructors, we should be excited to be learning about what students are learning and interested and curious, right? Like, I mean, most of my teaching career, I was teaching English, which for me, teaching writing, it's a long process and you don't always see if they're learning. And I was constantly like, okay, how do I know if they're actually getting it? Like, how do I know if they're getting better? And I was always looking for information in the writing that they were producing to show me that they picked something up from the last project that we worked on. I was always looking for that, always interested. Assessment should be a natural part of what we're doing throughout teaching and learning. So we should be thinking about assessment as a student begins a learning experience, as a student is midway through a learning experience. Like, it's not something that just happens at the end. We think about it as a summative experience because that's what sticks in our memory from like those high pressure moments. But we are naturally assessing all the time. Even we're assessing ourselves all the time in the personal things that we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a natural part of teaching and learning. Again, I use the word exciting because to me, it's that curiosity that drives assessment. And when you're finding out information is interesting. And so I'm naturally pretty excited about assessment. I want students to be interested in finding out what they know and what they don't know so they can recalibrate or, reimagine what they need to do in the classroom to learn differently. And then the last bullet here, the word educative, Grant Wiggins wrote educative assessment way back in the 90s, but it really hit me as if you're doing an assessment and you're not getting anything out of it that's going to change how you're approaching teaching and learning in your classroom, then you may need to look at what you're doing in your assessments. And I think a lot of us grew up going to school and taking those tests and the teachers would give you back your scores and nothing ever changed in the teaching and learning as a result of how students did. You just found out you did terrible and then you moved on or whatever, and so there should always be a reflection moment for the instructor and the student after an assessment. Okay, well, what do I need to do? Should I stay on this path or should I make an adjustment? Right. Anything you want to speak to in these bullet points?
I was just thinking of what I've done the past probably 3 semesters is I do more self-grading. So students self-grade their papers, and like
Nice.
we did math review assignment the first week. So they grade it. I ask if there's anything they want to see actually worked out. But it kind of gives time for that reflection of, I didn't show the work, or I missed units or calculation error. But kind of instead of just getting something back with marks on it from a teacher, they're actually like looking at the way the problem solved, comparing it to how they did it, and then making adjustments.
They're so much more plugged in, aren't they? And our brains are the most activated when we're wrong. So when a student makes a mistake, it doesn't compute, it doesn't connect, and they're wrong, and then their neurons light up and they're like, whoa, what happened just now? It's not what they expected. When something goes differently than we expect, that's when we're the most curious. So them grading themselves is an excellent way for them to be part of that assessment process. That's awesome.
And part of that is also a reflection if there's a group that's really having struggle, that gives me the feedback that either I need to concentrate on that, provide more resources.
Yeah.
Or like this past time, I had a student who whizzed through them all. So it's like, okay, I know that, when we get to the part of doing more calculations, they're not going to be super challenged by the calculation part, maybe just the theory behind it. So
right. Yeah. And because as we gain experience and flexibility as instructors, we figure out ways to supplement for those and enrich for those who need it. So if we have a student who's really struggling, we can encourage them to do extra work or come in and meet with us or to pair them up with somebody for tutoring. And then the ones, like you said, who are just whizzing through, we can figure out, okay, how can I continue to challenge this student or give this student an opportunity to take their knowledge further, and having them go through the same steps everybody else is going through is, maybe not so productive for them. So if we are at a level where we can supplement and enrich, that's a great reason to do it, and we know we need to do it once we do those assessments. So that's awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get into what we're hoping to walk away from today. These are the 3 learning outcomes I'm hoping you feel we accomplished by the end of our session. I want us to be discussing our use of activities. We're already in the middle of doing that. So I think that we're well on our way for that. I definitely want to introduce and have us reflect on activities that we can use before, during, and after a learning experience, because assessment should be happening throughout the process. And I'm going to be prompting you to think out loud, if you're comfortable with that, how you can implement at least 2 activities that I share today in your courses. You'll see at the bottom of the slide here, I have low tech and tech. What I want to present to you are a number of strategies. I've got a few, and I've divided them up. So I've divided them into that before, during, and after, and I've divided them by low tech and tech, so that whether you're teaching seated and you just want to do pencil, paper, kind of like hard low tech stuff, that's fine. But if you want to use technology like a WooClap, or you want to use a screen, you've got the option to do that either in a seated class or an online class. Sound good?
that's good. I'm making some notes on the side here on my paper so I can track some of these besides your recording. So
yeah, no worries. All right, so let's start with talking about before student learning happens. So as we're getting into maybe a new concept, a new module, a new unit, there's some things that we can do to set our students up to kind of prime them for what they're going to learn. And one of my favorite things to do, you see an image of it here, is an anticipatory guide. Now, I call this low tech. You could certainly put it through my courses or run it through a WooClap or something like that. But even having them answer questions on their own paper, hand out a little sheet of paper with some questions already on it. It's like, essentially a pre-test, but getting them to think about the content before the content gets introduced, right? This is an example of an anticipatory guide I used when teaching some students about healthy sleep patterns. I was doing some life skills instruction, and 18 to 24-year-olds may not all have the right ideas about sleep. So this was actually really telling to me about where they were with their sleep habits and their sleep behaviors and thoughts. And then we could talk about them. So using the anticipatory guide for students to self-assess and then maybe even open up discussion. The other option here that I've got is a whiteboard or butcher paper brainstorm. So you can also ask a question in a classroom setting where you say, okay, I want you guys to come up to the board and everybody write 3 things that come up when you hear this word, right? Or get in groups and fill this butcher paper with all the free associations that you have around this concept. Those kinds of pre-learning activities do so much for students, again, to prime them and get them to access that prior knowledge, but also are really telling for you, because then again, you can be like, oh, wow, they're already bringing in this much. Or maybe you've got a group that's really ahead of the game, and then 2 other groups that are maybe not, that maybe what they're showing is not indicative of some prior knowledge. So it can, again, allow you to have some flexibility. What are your thoughts when you hear about these 2 strategies?
So a lot of the times I use the flipped classroom, so they're reading before they come to class, so they've at least seen the words and stuff. Where do I incorporate a before learning activity with a flipped classroom?
That's such a good question. And I love that you're doing flipped learning. I would do it at the end of the class before they do that learning. So
Okay.
before they leave the day, the day before they're going to get introduced to that material, be like, okay, got a quick little anticipatory before you go home tonight. Here's 2 questions for you, and shoot them those questions. And again, you can do it in a classroom setting. You can have them get online and do it real quick if it's something you want to collect in an online environment.
And online, how would you see that? Like at the last module of the previous week
For sure. And you could set it up as a questionnaire if it didn't matter who answered what, if you just wanted aggregate data, if you wanted, well, even questionnaires, you can have their name in there. So, I mean, if you wanted to get their identifying information, you could do it. I mean, really, you could set it up in any kind of like a form or a poll. You could do it at the end of your PowerPoint, like throw it in and have it as a poll question or a couple questions at the end of like in a WooClap or something like that. Or, if you were doing it in a seated classroom, you could even have them, write it down on a piece of paper and leave it for you. So you just get an idea where they were before they got into that reading.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay.
For the asynchronous,
Yeah.
I know that I've tried to use a WooClap. Is that the best tool for an asynchronous like questionnaire, or there's some other techie tools?
I mean, I think WooClaps are, obviously we're using one right now. I think they're a really exciting, different option for us right now. We can play with them and learn a little bit about them. They're really versatile. If you're looking for something super basic, you could also just do a questionnaire, do a Google form. The path of least resistance is sometimes the easiest, right? If you wanted to capture it in the LMS, then I would, for an asynchronous course for RSI, you might want to go with a questionnaire or a quiz. And their pre-quizzes, like you could do a little pre-test or something, but not have it be for a grade, right? So you could just set it.
Right.
So,
and maybe there any like Jamboard type things that would work for asynchronous, where they can see what other people have posted?
Well, that's a great question too. I think Jamboards are awesome, and I'm going to go ahead and move to the tech side of this because we're already talking about it.
Right.
No, that is a great segue. I was talking with Jana Hosmer about this earlier. You can do a Jamboard asynchronously. You can still say the Jamboard will be open from this time to this time, and then you can take away their access. So, or you can, just say access will open at this time and please add your thoughts. And what I like about the Jamboard, I'll go back and just share that screen again to play with it for a second. In the Jamboard, you've got multiple screens so that we're just on one screen. I can create another slide. So you can create multiple slides within one Jamboard and they can move from topic to topic, or you can assign people. Like if I wanted certain students to be on slide 2, I can give directions right in the Jamboard as a text, right? Like I can write in what I want them to do. So complete this activity on your assigned slide. And then I can put the names of the people that I want on this slide, and then I can go to the next slide and have whoever I want on that one. So I really like that it can be a collaborative, even asynchronously, just like a Google Doc, One thing right now, it's defaulted as anonymous, the Jamboard is. So I think that getting it to be where their names are showing up, that's a setting you have to change. I haven't actually played with it very much in terms of the settings. So that would be one quick little thing, or you could just say, make sure you include your name. It wouldn't be hard to do.
Does it like link in my courses that they've like viewed the activity to complete? Nothing. Okay.
No, that's the one thing it does not do. So then you see that the other thing that I've got in here is polling with WooClap, and this is where your WooClap activity is going to kick in. I'm going to have us answer a couple quick questions, kind of as another example, and I know you're already familiar with this. I'll turn off our results here. Go ahead and answer this question in your WooClap, if you would. And so now we can see our results. And we know that, right? But if you were asking a group of people who didn't know much about assessment, that it would be really good to find out what they thought, right? Let's go ahead and move to the next question. Not really asking trick questions here. And again, we can see, and this would be another conversation point maybe for a group of people who are learning about how to use assessments. The last question is not an easy answer. You could see we were divided on that one. I'm curious to know what you think. Okay. You want to talk about that?
I think, at least like the engineering environment, the labs they do, the projects, the presentations, all those should prepare them to be successful in any formative assessments. So kind of building their confidence. But it is a different environment, and each student's gonna, may perform great in labs, and just the sitting down and answering questions is not their jam.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm understanding. So summative assessment's the one that comes at the end.
Yep.
So you're saying you disagree that
Right.
it's really the labs that are most important.
Labs, projects, working with other people.
I want to make sure I was following you.
Yep.
Yeah. And I, again, because of the area that I teach in, I tend to agree. I don't think that all the learning is happening just when they turn in that final paper, especially now with AI writing, right? Like I know that students are learning a great deal throughout that process, and that it's not something that just happens at the end. If I just graded final drafts, that would not be a true indicator of the learning. So for me, also, it's true that formative assessment is probably at least equally, if not more important, right?
I think I've been frustrated when I've taken classes where a final exam and final project, were the majority of the grade.
Right.
Like homework was 10%, some, postings were like 10%. And then it was like, final exam 50%. I steer away from those, because it was like, how can I judge myself as a student as I'm learning? How can I judge my learning when it's just going to be these two big chunks? And if I don't perform well in that type of setting.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and we know that the more low stakes assignments and formative assessments we can give students, that the more successful they're gonna be able to build success. The classes where there's like 2 or 3 high stakes assessments, those are great for students who don't need the class, essentially, right? Like they can come in and ace the test without much teaching. But if you're actually expecting students to learn, expecting them to do well on a high stakes assessment at midterm and final, and then there's nothing else being graded, it's not really showing the learning process so much. So yeah,
showing the fear process.
Absolutely. I think we're working away from that. And I love that we still have the freedom to weight things the way we want. But in my conversations, I talk with faculty a lot about, like, how much weight should you be giving homework if you really want students to do it and to find it to be worth their time? 5% is not going to encourage that, right? Yeah. So again, hopefully this is evidence that, while we're getting started in a concept, getting some ideas out there, getting people thinking about something, using a polling of some kind is another strategy. Let's go ahead and move on to when they're in the midst of the learning, right? So while we're learning, I've got a couple strategies here, and you may be familiar with them, you may not. Low tech stuff. So I imagine you do this first one quite a bit. Turn and talk to your partner about what you understand here. Explain to the people at your table what you know, right? That reciprocal teaching, or teaching back of a concept. It's a great way for students to self-assess, because we know as teachers, you don't know it till you teach it. And it helps them get a sense of how much they understand. They start talking, they're like, actually, I'm not sure, right? And then they're like, wait a minute. So that reciprocal teaching moment. Do you already do this in your classes, Carol?
Not as much. So I'm interested to learn more.
Yeah, I really love breaking up. I'm not the voice of authority in my classes. I look at myself as a facilitator of them building the knowledge. So my view of the classroom might be a little different than some other instructors. But what I really value is, hey guys, what do you think of this? Like, I'm the bringer of opportunity to learn. And then I say, okay, go out, let's interact with this content. And then I want you to talk to each other about what you got out of it and explain your view on this, or explain how you're going to use this. So I'm constantly prompting folks to be that expert in the moment from their perspective. I know it doesn't work with every content area, but I would imagine in your courses, there's moments where they get to be the person who knows the most about something because it's their project, right? Or it's they're the one who did the deep dive on that thing, right?
Yeah.
you said that you work from like a flipped model, so they're getting the content at night. Could you imagine, like, do you already have them talking with each other when class starts about what they got out of it? Is there some like sort of quick little mid-learning assessment you could do there?
What would that look like? Would you just discussion or
Yeah, I
talking?
mean, it could, or you could have like, maybe you have groups of 3 and you have 3 questions, like an A question, a B question, and a C question, and a member of the group, each member has to answer one of the 3 questions to their other group members. And it's based on the content from the night before. So they're getting together in a group, they're talking through their response to that particular question. Maybe give them a couple minutes before they get into the group to like think through what they're going to say and refer back to their notes or whatever, but then they've got to talk through and then their peers are kind of their checkers. They're like, that's not what I got out of last night's homework, right? Or maybe you give problems. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm liking that. I'm trying to think of like how to apply that already.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I want to talk more about it if it's something you want to try, because again, once they start talking out loud or even writing it down, like even just saying, okay, write this down and then pass it to your neighbor and see, like, maybe it's something that's hard to explain out loud, but they could check each other's work, right? As a quick assessment, because they've done the reading or they've done the problems the night before.
How how could you use that in an asynchronous online or not really?
That's a good question. I think you could use it in asynchronous online with groups or in a discussion forum. You could have them write, or like, again, if you're having a divergent prompt, right? Like pick a concept or pick a problem from what we learned last night and explain how you would work through it. And then 2 people need to reply back, or 1 person needs to reply back and check their work or whatever. And everybody does a different problem. So you'd probably have to set it up a little bit unique to your content area and what you're wanting them to do. But I think you could do it asynchronously. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then the second one I'm really curious about, I love having students draw. I learned a lot in my, when I was kind of still in that becoming a better teacher. I mean, you're always becoming a better teacher, but I was like really, really hungry for how do I do a better job here? One of my professors in grad school wrote a book about the different ways that we show how we know things, and just really did a lot of research in special education and learning styles and learning intelligences, and looked at the high number of students who struggle with words but are so good with images. And I'm a word person, so this is hard for me, but I know that I've got students who can draw out a concept way better than they can explain it, right? Like they can sketch it out, and it also it triggers that abstract thinking that we can't always get to with words right away. So this is an example. The prompt was, I'd like you to draw a picture that represents a leadership principle. And the drawing here, we have a person in the middle of the drawing with an L above their image. That's the leader. And what you see around that person are all the other people, and they're all it looks like they're carrying something. And the explanation that goes with this is, well, if the leader is modeling the way and leading by example, then they're doing the same thing they're asking everybody else to do, and they're with their people. Well, that drawing definitely describes that, right? Like you can see it. Once I explain it, you're like, oh yeah, totally. Like that person totally gets it. Having a student draw out a concept and explain it to you gets at them 2 different ways, right? It activates that visual thinking, and then they still have to use words, either write it out or say it out loud. And I don't know, when you think about your courses, I would imagine there's a lot of images, right? There's a lot of drawing that happens. They're already doing a lot of drawing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you already use some sketching drawing for assessment while they're in the midst of the learning?
Not for assessment, like for visualizing how to like start or conceptualize a project. But I like that.
Yeah. And again, this is a low stakes. We're not talking about taking a grade on it necessarily, but getting a sense, or them getting their own sense of, do they really get it? If they draw it and they try to explain it and the people at their group are like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Like a Pictionary.
Right. I mean, that's telling as well, right? And so, you can use this again, just in a quick do a quick drawing. And it could also be the other side of it. You could say, I want you to sketch for just a minute of your level of understanding of this concept. So you could be assessing what they sense as their metacognition, right? Like, how are you feeling? Sketch how you're feeling about this unit right now. Sketch how you feel now that you're done with this test, or now that you got your grade back, or whatever. So you can use the drawing piece in a lot of different ways. It's really great. When we think about technology, I've got some more polling here. I don't know, have you used Kahoot in the past or any kind of online quizzing? Yeah.
Yes.
So you already do this, right? You ask a question and you're quizzing them, and that's that mid-learning assessment that you're doing in class. This one's a pretty easy way to tell if people are plugged into what's going on. They should be able to answer this question. And so we're seeing that we've got, folks are able to say, okay, yeah, a student can get all this out. And so if I'm teaching assessment right now and I see everybody understands that assessment helps students in lots of ways, I feel like, okay, we're moving in the right direction. I can keep going. If I had 2 people out of the 3 of us who didn't recognize all 3 of these, I would stop and reteach, right? Like I would probably say, okay, we need to have a conversation here before we go any further. Or I would make a note of it and maybe go back to it at another time, right? I think part of assessment, like we're afraid sometimes to even know if the students know, because we're so driven to get through everything, Yeah, that happens. So it's like, I'm just going to keep talking. Yeah. What about this question? This is one that you would write your answer in. And so then I can look at it in a grid. I can look at it as a list, and I can see the 4 responses. Yeah. So I like that there's so many different ways to check in with students through the WooClap tool, because it really helps us pick the right assessment method for that moment. Multiple choice doesn't always do the trick, but if you've got a small enough class, getting a list of their open-ended responses could be really telling, right? This one is just an open question, it's called.
Open question.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so while we're learning using WooClap or Kahoot or, for a tech-based, I would say that those 2 are probably going to be your strongest. And you've used WooClap asynchronously. How many times have you done that now, Carol?
I didn't. I resorted back to the lesson because there really wasn't a way to track timing, or the timing part was really the one for RSI.
Okay.
And so lesson kind of covered the same, not as bright and shiny maybe as WooClap can be, but it did allow more to ensure they were had time on task for the asynchronous and could still track assessments and learning and check-in questions along the way.
Yeah, that's a problem I don't love that we are having, that you don't feel like you can really assess or appropriately measure time on task. Yeah. So were you running them through a PowerPoint and then they had questions, or they were just going in and doing questions? Like how was it set up before?
Set it up as a lesson.
Okay.
So the lesson in my courses, and then they had a topic, a video, and then a questions afterwards, or a PDF to read and then questions afterwards. So
yeah. But when you tried to do it as a WooClap, did you set it up the same way?
I did. It was a little wonky trying to get the PowerPoint to import and then add the questions in, but I kind of got through that kind of initial tech part. But it was just you still have to pull down the questions and grade kind of outside of my courses.
Yeah.
But there was no way to track what time they spent. So
gotcha.
I think that was, the time was, I think, the key from, I think it was over a year ago. I tried to kind of.
Oh, yeah.
look into that.
So, and so the amount of time that was spent is something that we would want to be able to document with, like you felt like you needed to have that. Even if it was designed to take an hour, you wanted to know how much time they spent. Yeah, gotcha. Okay, that's good feedback. Thank you. The other option that I think, kind of goes along with the sketching, again, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, whether you're seated or you're online, having them find an image that illustrates a point or is an example of something or communicates a concept. Again, our students are highly, highly visual. And I would imagine in your courses, you have a lot of students who really understand things when they imagine them or look and think about what it might look like. They can imagine what it would look like. And so getting them to come up with an image. These two images were provided when I asked students, show me a picture of bad LNT, bad leave no trace principles. And so if the picture on the right, if I say, okay, tell me why you picked this picture, they better be able to explain to me, well, the trail's all covered, it's all muddy and clearly people are walking on it. You're not supposed to be hiking on muddy surfaces. It's that principle is travel and camp on durable surfaces. They didn't do that. That's bad LNT. If they can explain that, they get it, right? So having them find an image that illustrates a point and then share it with others, share it with you, post it in a discussion forum. Sometimes I'll have them bring up an image on their screen and then we'll get up and we'll walk around the room and we'll all look at each other's images. You can have students like take turns, like, okay, front row, you come look at second row's stuff and then we'll swap. So you can have them share an image and talk with each other. Again, that quick check-in with a peer is another way to do that. Any thoughts?
Are there other, can they share an image like on Jamboard?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a great way to do it. And again, you could create a Jamboard where there's a separate page for every student. So they all bring images onto their own slide and then they go and look at everybody else's slides and maybe even leave comments on there. So you could really use that Jamboard robustly. You can have as many slides on there as you wanted. That's a great idea. So let's go ahead and move to our last segment, right? At the end of the learning. And of course, we're thinking summative assessment. I'm not quite there yet. I'm still in that formative phase of like, okay, maybe the class session is over. When we're thinking low tech here, we're probably thinking things like muddiest point, one sentence summaries, exit tickets. Those are all great. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I do want to bring up though that, you can have have a student do an exit ticket that gives them options. So if we're forcing everybody to write a question, there's going to be some students who are like, I don't have any questions. What do you want me to do? Make up a question? That's stupid. They're not going to feel like it's authentic. So giving them like front loading this and say, okay, at the end of class, every class, you're going to do some kind of piece that you walk out and hand it to me. And that's your participation for the day or whatever. Having them have options of you're going to write the 3 biggest things that you got out of it, or you're going to write a question, or you're going to make a connection. So give them some options. So a 1-sentence summary, I think, is a nice way to kind of focus that. And you can certainly do that too. And I even use it like almost as a mid-learning, but like, let's put an end to that piece before we move on. Write down 1 sentence of what you just got out of that, just for yourself, just to move on to kind of bookend that piece. So you can use that strategy throughout a class session, but especially at the end. Do you do this?
I do muddiest point, not every week.
Mm-hmm.
I do it like, depending on the class, like my automation class has like 2 to 3 week segments.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll do that, like, or 3, 2 or 3 things you understand or you're still muddy on.
Yep.
And then I just collect them from them, and then I write, have them write, do you want me to contact you on this? Yes or no.
Nice.
Whether they're just reflecting or they're would like assistance.
What if we're, I'm imagining your class sizes are small-ish. What if 2 or 3 students have the same muddiest point? What do you do then?
You go back. Yeah, the next week kind of be like, okay, got a lot of questions on this.
Yep.
We're going to do an in-class assignment, work through this, working groups.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, that's such a gift to us, right? When you have those students who will tell you what they're not getting, and then they give you that opportunity to help them get it, right? So that those muddiest points, those are great. And I like the sentence summary in a similar way. If I have a bunch of students all writing, like if I say, I want you to write down the most important thing that came out of today's session, and they're all writing about the one concept, as long as that was the one concept that was really important, that's great. But if they all identify some kind of subtopic that wasn't really related to what I was trying to get across, that tells me, okay, maybe I need to come at this a different way, or at least say, hey, I was a little surprised that nobody wrote about this. Does anybody have questions? So it can, again, prompt discussion. And you can use those when you see them again, like you're talking about. You can also use those to prompt a course announcement or do something outside of the seated class time to follow up, or to, like you said, contact a student individually. There's just so many ways we can use those. And same with a note card quiz, right? Like if you say, okay, get out a sheet of paper, this is not for a grade. Again, maybe it just counts towards participation or attendance or whatever. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Maybe you got them up on the board, whatever, and they have to work that out. Again, it's a good way for you and the student to see, all right, class is over. What came out of today? Because I think that's the worst feeling I've ever had, Carol, is when I leave a class and I'm like, I have no idea what the point of today's class was. So annoying, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like a waste of time. So as long as when we're doing that, we're really prompting them to reflect and like acknowledge for themselves what they got out of it, right? In terms of the tech side, I'm going to push this, knowing that there's probably a lot of people that would hate to have to do this on the receiving side, but I like asking students to email me, and I'll even do it at the end of a class session. All right, open up your email. I want you to email me something big that came out of today's class. And then I've got a written record. Now we've got our LMS. We can have them do it in messages. We could have them do it in a Q&A forum. So some sort of way to capture through the tech that we already have a written statement about what they got out of it. So similar, just using the technology. A lot of instructors don't necessarily want that many messages in their inbox. And I get that for sure. I definitely get that. But again, if you had them handwritten, and then you wanted to repost stuff, then it could kind of be clunky. If they're all typed, maybe even if you just had a Google Doc where everybody added their 1-sentence summary, now you've got an easy place to pull from if you wanted to repost any of those in an announcement or any kind of a additional supplement, right? In terms of quizzes or questionnaires, I know a lot of folks like to finish class with a quick recap. Okay, before you leave, for you, because you're doing your classes flipped, I don't even know, I wonder, would you consider quizzing students halfway through a class session before you enter? I don't know what your flow looks like. When do you say, okay, that concept is over, or we're ready to move on? Is that during class or?
So they would have read beforehand. I go through kind of presentation and fill in more details behind what they read, and then hit the key points again.
Yep.
So generally and then we do, maybe we'll do a lab.
Okay.
Towards the end of class, or the last hour or so, to demonstrate or touch feel kind of manipulatives.
Yeah. So I wonder, when we were talking earlier about the preview or the pre-test, what if you had one exercise that had a couple questions about what just happened, this part, and then a couple questions to prime them for the next thing. So there's, a couple questions that are geared to target, okay, did you get what you just did? And then a couple questions to get them thinking about what's coming next. Yeah.
Finish out a chapter and then show the title of the next one, kind of thing.
Yeah. Just again, to kind of get them started. Just an idea of how you could use it effectively without creating too much extra stuff for you. That one artifact from that student gives you a lot of information. So I don't know, something to think about. Do you use quizzes within my courses?
I do. Yep.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll do the note card quiz. I've done that, or short pieces of paper quiz kind of thing.
Yeah. Not everything needs to be. I think that my courses has so many great options, but at the same time, I'm also very much a note card person. If you've got them right in front of you, hand out the note cards. I don't think. And
I'll scan those in as documentation of.
Oh wow.
Assessment.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And they, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and you know, we can talk about RSI. You don't necessarily need to do it for auditing purposes. It's a great record for you. But if you're teaching a blended or hybrid course, we're not looking for that necessarily, you know, so don't spend a ton of time if unless you really like to have that in there, you know, for the student record keeping. All right, so here is another example of a post-learning assessment. This is a little brainstorm list in our WooClap. And I think you can put your thoughts into any of these areas. And you can even add your own area. So what are 2 techniques you like to try? My request is that you add in one technique to like add in at least 2 techniques into any of the areas. So we've got some ideas in here. I'm not trying to stop you. Have you've thought more about the sketch and explain?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you want to share?
I'm trying to think of like what that looks like, because some things will be hard for me to sketch and explain, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why I think it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I went again, I learned so much through just the professional development that I did, that I continue to do. One of my favorite sessions I went to when I was teaching middle school was on drawing in the classroom. And it just was so freeing to me because I'm not an artist. I've never tried to be an artist, but I like to draw. And the facilitator was like, draw badly. Give all the students in your classroom permission to just draw badly. It is okay. Like, he's like, nobody cares how badly you draw. They just want to hear your ideas. So you not knowing how to draw it doesn't mean that you can't try, right? And even just talking about like, okay, this is what this is supposed to be. That's really where the money is, right? So even if it doesn't look exactly like it's supposed to look, nobody's going to care.
I embarrass myself every week when I draw, and
Yeah.
I tell them, you know, I worked for a long time trying to get these straight lines, so
yeah,
we got to.
Yeah. I joke around sometimes that, you know, when teachers go to school to be teachers, they make you take classes on like overhead projector and whiteboard drawing and like, you know, it's funny what 8th graders will believe, but yeah, we don't have skill sets in all the areas, right? But doesn't mean our students don't. And again, that's how area, like you might have a student that all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, this is an area you can shine. So it gives them a chance to be the star for just a second too. Let's see. You like the Jamboard idea? Have you been using Jamboard?
Nope.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I think you'll like it. And again, it's free. It's right there in our Gmail waffle or Google waffle. It's super easy to access. And once students know it's there, I think they can use it in a lot of ways, just in their, you know, it's a nice tool. Go ahead.
Do we have any, I know we got the basic Kahoot. Do we have any access to the more advanced Kahoots through our student license or our?
We don't.
No,
We don't. And you know, right now we've got this WooClap application. I really am promoting it and trying to encourage folks to use it because we're paying for it. If we stop having it, that would be a time that we could maybe look at Kahoot. And I'm not opposed, like this is just what we had when I showed up. So I'm not necessarily opposed to Kahoot at all. I'd be interested to hear, you know, maybe at another time to hear your thoughts on what might make it more applicable for our students. I don't know. I know they're very familiar with it. That's for sure. Cause they all do it in grade school. Yeah, for sure. Well, these were the 3 things I said we were going to try to work through today. As we're wrapping up, I just want to check in. Do you feel like you had a chance to discuss your use of assessment activities?
Yeah.
Okay. What about reflecting on activities that you could actually implement.
Definitely.
Okay. And then you shared how you could implement 2 activities in your courses.
Excellent.
That's what we got. Do you have any other questions or suggestions for me or things that you want to keep me thinking about? We can follow up on.
Nope, I'm excited to be stretched to incorporate some new things, especially the visual, especially Jamboard. We're gonna be doing some Jamboard.
Yeah, I don't want to add too much to your reading list. I know you probably read more than, just finishing grad school, but I am going to send you the link, a link with my colleague's book. It's called Talking, Sketching, Moving. And just really gave me a lot to think about in terms of how we can honor different abilities in our classes and really invite different ways of showing what we know, especially through drawing. So it's a really great read. So I'll share that with you. I'll send you an email, but
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carol.
Yeah, great to see you.
Spending time with you. Yeah. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.